Hi, welcome to the video. So in this video I'm going to do another little snapshot of my time at Musicians Institute in 1986-87. Specifically I'm going to talk about the student handbook you got the first week of class that along with your first week's of curriculum is basically giving you tips of how to practice, how to approach the year. They give a practice regimen for like daily practice, but it's different than the preparatory guide. In the preparatory guide they did in a different video. That's telling you specifically, that's have you learn a couple of scales, some arpeggios, some chords, some chord progressions, and they also gave a practice regimen too, but it was a less intensive one. On this one it was 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for the incoming students. Once you're a student, it was minimum of 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. So they upped it, expectations on it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So they, on the very first page, they basically break things into two parts. Basically, your self-learning, more the mental aspects, the how to learn, how to practice, how to overcome fear of performing, all of that. And I'm going to get into that in a second, because that's a lot of the stuff they talk about this, and they also talked about it in the classes. So I'm going to go into some of their main ideas on that, because maybe those can help you. The second thing, of course, you're just actually learning the reading, writing, and performing music. So let's go and talk about the practice. So one thing they want you to do when you're there is you're supposed to get off the paper as quick as possible. Because if you're having to think about what's the next note coming, then that's what you're going to be thinking about. You can't get your technique better if you're just trying to get to the right note. And then the next step would be actually, okay, now I'm using the correct fingers, the correct picking, what's most efficient, all of that technique stuff. And then eventually you get into where if I'm improvising like I am now, I'm not thinking about which finger goes where. I'm just playing. And you have to get to a point where you're thinking more about the general things of, well, what feel do I want? Or what emotions do I want to get across? On a technical aspect, that might be done through playing something softer or harder, the type of vibrato you do, the other little things like slides, hammer and pull-offs, speed changes, and things like that. So to create different emotions and different feelings. So you have all these different elements of practice, but the kind of key is when you're doing something difficult, break into small pieces, practice it very exacting and very slow so you're not making mistakes. At that point you're not really working on the artistic aspects, but you're more working on the technical aspects of it. But first get off the paper very quickly, or off the video in this case, if you're learning something new, so that you don't have to think about the memorization. Then relax while you're doing it. You never play as well if you're stressed. And learning to relax when you're playing will help you then when you have to perform on stage or something else. Of course, that's why they live playing workshops too, that they required you to get up on stage, because they wanted you to physically do that too, because that helps you get over that fear also. But fear or nervousness is a common thing. I mean, I still sometimes, if I'm playing on one of these videos and I'm trying something that's a fairly new thing I created, lick or something that I have difficulty with, I'll get nervous. So I'm going to take these, because I don't edit any of these too, which makes it more stressful, so I'm trying to play the complete thing straight through without messing up with my talking or my playing. And usually my talking gives me more trouble. But anyways, let's get back into this. So, they break it down, your basic areas that you're going to be studying. They had video lessons, private lessons. So you did private lessons each week. Master classes, those are just your normal classes. Applied reading and ear training, seminars and concerts, visiting faculty, concerts or seminars. Then student responsibility, they said practice, practice, practice. That's the key. Take responsibility for your own success. To say, do not rely on MI or anyone else for that matter for your success. And later on in these other pages, they talk about that same sort of thing, that don't expect it. Let me actually read it to you. Don't wait for it to be opportunity and information to be handed to you on a silver platter. Don't expect a mind to make a player out of you. If it is in you to make it as a player, you'll make it with or without the school. And I think that's important. Not you can substitute the school that they're talking about with anything on it. Whether it's an instructor or videos or books. You can learn a lot from different sources, but ultimately it comes down to you to put in the hard work and learn it. If you're not getting it, that's where having a private instructor does help on it. Because, well, if you're watching these videos, leave a comment. If you have a question, I'll try and answer any comments. I read all the comments. And speaking of which, so if you like these videos, please subscribe to, because that means a lot to me. But let's go ahead and jump forward to, and at one point too, when they talk about the practice, they say that they expect you to have your guitar in your hand 10, 12 hours a day. That's something I disagree with. I mean, when I was there, I had to work part-time because of unexpected additional expenses and other issues. And, if you're working 8 hours a day, you're not going to be then playing 10, 12 hours a day probably. But you don't need to either. Most people, when they pick up the guitar, they play songs they already know. They play songs that are at the same level of ones they already know. They run through scales and arpeggios and things they already know. And if you don't have trouble with something, if it's fairly easy for you, if you say after 20 repetitions could play something, when you've done it 100 times, you're really not getting better probably, unless you're actively trying to find nuances and things that you can improve on. So you can be playing many hours a day and not improving at all if you're not challenging yourself. The key to improving is challenging yourself. There was a time when I was teaching private lessons 10, 11 in a row, so 5-6 hours of back-to-back private lessons. I wouldn't improve at all from that because I wasn't challenging myself in them. But if I had someone not show up for a lesson and a half-hour break that I could practice and actually focus on things, I would get more out of that half hour than out of the 5 hours of teaching. Because in the teaching, I'm teaching basic scales, chords, songs that weren't challenging for me. So you always have to challenge yourself. And hour of practice is more beneficial than 6 hours of unfocused practice where you don't challenge yourself. But also, repeatedly in here they say don't overdo it. Don't burn yourself out. Take breaks. They recommend a break every half hour for 5 minutes. And if you're only doing 15 minutes a day, and let's say you're only doing 3 times a week, try and do it 5 times a week. Don't suddenly try and force yourself to do 4 hours a day, because you're either going to physically hurt yourself or you're going to mentally burn out. Take small increments, just like you would getting better with a scale or something. Small increments of improvements. So if you want to practice more, add an extra 10 minutes a day. It doesn't, as a minimum, doesn't mean you can't do longer if you want to. But then we get into this next part, because I think this kind of sums up what I'm saying too. They say common traps that students get into, and they're not knowing why you're playing. And that's true of, especially if you're practicing something, you should know why you're practicing it. If it's just because you think it sounds cool, that's fine. But if you're practicing a scale or a chord, you want to know what you're going to use it for, how you're going to apply it, not just memorizing things without knowing what to do with them. Living up to someone else's expectations, living up to your own expectations, trying to be as good as other players. Again, these are all just traps that you shouldn't let yourself get into. Trying to impress other players with your chops, thinking you're superior to other players, or thinking you're inferior to other players, either one. Passing a test or getting a diploma, trying to take on too much material and ODing, or impatience to see results. Then what you should be doing, and I agree with this, there's only one real priority you should concern yourself with. Play for the sheer joy of expressing yourself with your music at the level that you are at any given moment. So again, don't think, well, I can only play at this level. I'm not going to be happy until I get this level. You enjoy whatever you can do. If the only thing you can improvise with is a pentatonic scale and you only know one fingering, that's fine. That's how I started off. And I had plenty of fun just improvising like that. And that makes you a better player too. You don't have to know every fingering across the whole neck to make it interesting solo or to have fun with it. And it goes on to say, remember you're a player because you want to be, not because you have to be. So when the old frustrations and mistaken feelings start to overcome you, stop, kick back, and say, I don't have to. put the axe down and go to the beach. So yeah, and keep in mind, they did have a lot of expectations. So this isn't saying don't practice, but it's saying don't think you have to be able to play like some great player, or if you're watching someone on YouTube, a lot of times they demonstrate stuff very quick. You don't have to play that quick. Whether you're playing, arpeggio at fast speed, or you're playing something slow, it doesn't necessarily. There's not a right or wrong, and you should do both. And if you're not able to go fast yet, create contrast by playing at different speeds. If your fastest speed is, then play even slower. Then you at least have some contrast in your different speeds. You don't, and that will make your playing sound faster when you do speed up, if you play even slower. Anyways, I'm going to jump into this, which is the practice regimen they're recommending for on a daily and weekly basis. So they're saying, again, minimum 4 hours a day. But again, if you're working a full-time job, have a family, that's probably not realistic, and it's not necessary. You can get very good at guitar practicing an hour a day if it's focused. 6 days a week, 5 to 10 minutes of warm-up exercises should be performed before every practice session. Then they go on to 30 minutes of sight reading, a 5-minute break, 30 minutes of ear training, 5-minute break, 25 minutes of harmony and theory, 5-minute break. Now, on all those, they have asterisks, and then they say at the bottom, don't do these ones. These time frames should be fixed. Don't lengthen or shorten them. So don't go longer, because again, they don't really want you burning out trying to do 2 hours of just ear training. At some point, you hit diminishing returns where it doesn't benefit you as much. That's why switching between these different things can be beneficial too, because you're not burning out on one thing. And some of these, I would say, isn't necessary for everyone. Like sight reading, most rock players, metal players, etc. If you're not playing in a style like jazz or classical that still uses a lot of standard notation, or you're going to go to a college or something that requires it, you don't necessarily have to practice sight reading that much. I think it's still beneficial to have some basic sight reading ability. That way, if you find like a piano or violin piece and you want to try and arrange it for guitar, you're able to. But I would say the main thing for sight reading, most players who don't play in styles that they're usually using tab, you should focus on learning to read rhythms. Get very comfortable at doing different rhythmic groupings on it, because that's something that even if you're reading tab, you have to be able to read the rhythms unless you're going to figure out the rhythms by ear. Plus, it makes your rhythm playing stronger, I think, if you play with a metronome and strum different rhythm patterns. Anyways, let's go and move on. So then it goes on scales, 15 minutes, arpeggios, 15 minutes, interval skips. And I've done videos on, a lot of videos on scales and arpeggios, so I'm not going to talk about them. In the one on practice regimen, I talk about intervals. So anyways, then our break, 15 minutes of chords, 15 minutes of right hand technique. So working on your picking or finger picking or whatever right hand technique you're using. Then our break, and then 55 minutes of improvisation or playing songs. Which then totals 4 hours. So yeah, very regimented. I never would practice something in this regimented fashion. I focus more on challenging myself, so I might sit and play some difficult lick, a piece of a song, or scale exercise for 20, 30 minutes or so, and then I'll move on to something different, but I don't necessarily regiment it out. I'm going to do 15 minutes of this and 15 minutes of that. Again, it's about enjoying what you're playing, but also if you want to improve, pushing yourself a little bit, trying to get a minimum amount of practice each day. If you go further than that, that's great. That's why I wouldn't set big minimums. Set an hour if you're currently doing maybe an hour and a half. Set something lower than what you usually do, and then that's your minimum. And then if you end up doing 2 hours, great. But if you end up doing hours, that's fine. That's your minimum you're trying to do. And if you miss a day, even this is only 6 days a week, is saying. Doesn't mean you can't play 7 days a week, but there's always going to be things that will get in your way to make you not be able to do it. And don't beat yourself up when that happens. It doesn't matter in the big picture if you miss a day. as long as that doesn't become 2 days, 3 days, and keep going. And that's the risk of missing days, is that it becomes a habit and it becomes not a priority. So get time in whenever you can. 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Do it while you're watching TV or talking to people, but also do it focused by yourself so you can really focus on. Anyways, thanks for watching. I do have a whole playlist of videos talking about different aspects of Musicians Institute when it's there, and they can check out my channel, and please subscribe. Thanks.